After the first talk, let's go to the second presentation in the first panel. I think it's interesting that after a talk by the president of the Linguistic Society of Europe, now we have a talk by the president of the Linguistic Society of Iran, LSI. I am deeply honored to introduce our invited speaker, Dr. Azita Afrashi. She is Associate Professor of Linguistics and the Dean of the Faculty of Encyclopedic Studies at the Institute for Humanities and Cultural Studies. Her research interests are cognitive semantics, especially the theory of conceptual metaphor, semiotics, dialectal studies, and Persian grammar. She has written a couple of books related to the mentioned areas, such as Introducing Cognitive Semantics and Metaphor and Cognition. In line with her main expertise, Dr. Afrashi will present her talk under the title of Conceptual Metaphor, Theoretical Challenges. The time allotted to this talk is 20 minutes, and like the previous presentation, you can ask your question via the chat box. Dr. Afrashi, all of us are waiting to listen to you with interest.
سلام خانم دکتر بهرامی، صدای منو دارین؟
بله.
I will continue in Persian, of course. I dedicate my regards to the organizers of the conference, Science of Language and the Brain, my dear Dr. Safavi, and my dearest panel presenter, Dr. Sahar Bahrami, and I thank for the outstanding presentation of Professor Verhagen. And I thank all the presenters and students and researchers who attend this panel. If you let me, I will run my slides first.
Afrashi, I think, yeah, your slides are uploaded. Perfect.
Yes, that's right. The topic of my presentation, as said by Dr. Sahar Bahrami, is conceptual metaphor, theoretical challenges. Metaphor has been the central topic within cognitive linguistics since the field was born in 1970s. Metaphor is used as a pattern of association rather than an individual metaphorical usage. The essence of metaphor is understanding and experiencing one kind of thing in terms of another. These two books, Metaphor Will Live By and Women, Fire, and Dangerous Things, are George Lakoff's seminal works introducing this concept that at least that at that time still needed to be developed in various dimensions. Gradually, metaphor was used as a key point to develop interdisciplinaries. Works such as these listed here show this interdisciplinary connections between metaphor and other fields of study. Works such as Metaphors We Love By, Metaphors We Lead By, Metaphor, Morality and Politics, Metaphors, Morality and Healthy Business, Metaphor and Child Language Development. And it is now recognized, this theory, the theory of metaphor, as a theoretical framework vastly discussed and published, as we know. However, it's irrefutable that the framework is explaining the essence of abstract conceptualization, but here we are talking about the theoretical challenges and the methodological restrictions, few of which are listed here. For example, among the methodological restrictions, we may notice limited examples that are mainly from English in the literature of the theory of conceptual metaphor. These examples are mainly based on intuition and inattentive to linguistic data from other language families other than Indo-European languages. These restrictions inadvertently limit the generalizations and adequacy of observations and analyses. But gradually, we see that expansions to the theory came into existence through different works. For example, Metaphor in Culture by Zoltan Kovacevic, or works published by Ning Yu and other linguists who we may notice in next slides. Concepts and terms in a theory are meant to be theoretically precise, but it appears that conceptual metaphor has blurred borders with at least the following terms. Polysemy of perception verbs, metonymy, unidirectionality of mappings in the conceptual theory framework, physiological metaphors of emotion, and synesthesia. It appears that within the framework of conceptual metaphor, the borders of conceptual metaphor with these concepts and terms is somehow blurred. We came to recognize these challenges during the last 20 years of research within this theory using Persian language database PLDB on a huge corpus of Farsi and performing comparative studies on Iranian languages and dialects. Research on perception verbs related to semantic fields of seeing, hearing, smell or olfaction, taste, and touch. And I think we have to add field of motion verbs to this category. Came into existence with works of Iraide Ibaret-Santunano, especially her work on polysemy and metaphor in perception verbs, a cross-linguistic study, in which she compared verbs of perception in different languages such as English, Spanish, French, and Basque. And she noticed a pattern of systemic polysemy for the expansion of meanings within this field of perception verbs in these languages. Another outstanding work which actually derives examples from the field of perception verbs is from Etymology to Pragmatics by Yves Switzer, the outstanding work that merges historical semantics with synchronic semantics with a cognitive approach and examples mainly derived from the semantic field of perception verbs. I came to see on our works within the framework of conceptual metaphor theory, which were mainly corpus-based and dealing with a vast amount of evidences and examples from Persian language, and then compared with different other Iranian languages, and focused on different etymological dictionaries, mainly mainly based on the research on Iranian languages. We came to see that while analyzing and trying to extract the metaphorical mappings, the borders between the polysemy of perception verbs and conceptual metaphors were somehow blurred. For example, in case of analyzing the polysemy, one polysemic meaning of to see, didan in Farsi, as of to understand, whether we are facing a case of polysemy, systemic polysemy, or we are dealing with an underlying metaphorical mapping as understanding is seeing. There is a very good example in Farsi. بنشین بر لب جوی و گذر عمر ببین. Understand the passage of seeing in this example is used meaning understanding the passage of time, not seeing the passage of time. In another example, in case of the verb here, which is again a perception verb, it is not actually clear that we are dealing with a case of polysemy when here is meant to obey, or we are dealing with an underlying metaphorical mapping as obedience is hearing. In this example, بشنو ز من این نکته که برخیز و بیا. Here, to hear is used to mean obey, but it is not clear that if we are dealing with polysemy or an underlying metaphorical mapping. As another example, let's come to another perception verb in Farsi, to taste. One of its meaning in Farsi is to experience. Again, we don't know, when analyzing a huge amount of data, Persian data, whether we are dealing with a case of polysemy, as to taste means in certain contexts to experience, or we are dealing with an underlying metaphorical mapping as experience is tasting. In this poem by Sa'di, چو سعدی کسی ذوق خلوت چشید, someone who has experienced privacy. But Sa'di has said someone who has tasted privacy. A seminal work by Mark Turner on literary and non-literary metaphor named Death is the Mother of Beauty is an outstanding work, and for us Persians that we have and we have inherited a very precious database of Persian literature. This work and the pattern presented in this book is quite profitable and is very actually very prominent among all other works because there is a difference, and Turner makes a difference between literary metaphor and non-literary metaphor, between dead metaphor and live metaphor. And here we'll use somehow from the concepts of introduced by Turner as reversal of unidirectionality of mappings. Again, I have to point to the first slide as there are certain features in the conceptual theory of metaphor that, because they are mainly based on the data from English language and from languages within the family of Indo-European languages, they can be actually they are they cannot be always true. One of them is the reversal of unidirectionality of mappings. As it is declared within this framework, the transition or actually the direction for the formation of abstract conceptualization is from the source domain to target domain. Source domain related to our everyday experience is experiential, and target domain to the domain of abstraction. But we came to actually the finding that in Farsi, in Japanese, and in Spanish, as we made several comparisons between these languages, and the works are published and now available in the internet, that evidences are available to reverse the unidirectionality of metaphorical mappings. Especially, there are several evidences in Persian literature. For example, بس غذای سکر و وجد و بیخودی از در اهل دلان برجان زدی. Here, برجان زدن, to nurture the soul, means to nurture the soul. But to nurture the soul is used to mean eating. Whether the mapping eating is nurturing the soul, a metaphorical mapping as presented within the conceptual metaphor theory, it shows a reversal of mappings. And I think it's one of the challenges of the metaphor, of the theory of metaphor, because such evidences are numerous in Persian literature, in Japanese, and in Spanish. In the line of the expansion of the theory of the metaphor, conceptual metaphor, another line of study and another line of research came into existence, and that was metaphors of emotion, on which we have a vast corpus of study in Iran, hopefully. But for the start of this research, I may introduce the book Metaphor and Emotion by Zoltan Kovcic and Metaphors of Anger, Pride, and Love, again by him. Within the framework of metaphor of emotion, a subsidiary branch is introduced in these words as physiological metaphors of emotion. I think physiological metaphors of emotion again present a challenge for the theory of metaphor. Why? Let's see a few examples. These are verses from Shahnameh Ferdowsi. به دل پرزکین شد به رخ پرزچین فرسته فرستاد زی شاه چین. Here, anger is frowning. My question is that, is truly anger is frowning a prototypical mapping as presented in the theory of metaphor? Or as another example, همه موبدان صرف کنده نگون پر از هول دل دیدگان پر ز خون. Again, in Shahnameh, Ferdowsi has used a metaphor. Fear is blushing in the eyes. I think this physiological experience, which unconsciously happens, is a challenge if we compare it to other mappings, for example, ontological mappings or directional mappings and structural mappings, structural metaphors. This is somehow different.
Dear Dr. Afrashi, I do apologize. We have only 5 minutes.
Thank you, thank you. As another example, again from شاهنامه، سپه را ز غم چشمها تیره شد، مرا چشم در تیرگی خیره شد. The underlying mappings, metaphorical mapping, is sadness is blurred vision. Again, in the same line of inference, I think it creates a challenge for the theory of metaphor. And as my last evidence, I just notice linguistic synesthesia, which is introduced first by Jacobson, and then Kartovic has a seminal work on that. And then I think in the field of neurological synesthesia, works of Ramachandran is quite outstanding and noticeable. In synesthesia, stimulation of one sense results in the stimulation of another sense. Stimulation of one sense should result in the processing of the information related to that sense. But in synesthesia, as you know, stimulation, for example, in hearing, results in the stimulation of seeing, or vice versa, or other senses. As an example, I quote from Quran. فَقَوْلًا لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا نرمی سخن گفتن. Tell him smoothly. Tell smoothly. Here, touch is transited, a transition from touching to hearing happened. Is truly hearing is touching a case of metaphorical mapping? As we see, both domains relate to the experiential domain of domain, and they are not abstract. Or, as my final slide, in these examples, warm scent or بوی گرم in Farsi, a transition from touch to olfaction or smelling happened. Whether this mapping is a metaphorical map, smelling is touching, or in نگاه سرد or cold look, a transition from touch to seeing has happened. Seeing is touching is again a metaphorical map. As my concluding remarks, a unified theory of metaphor needs to address precisely the overlaps and differences between conceptual metaphor in one hand and systemic polysemy of perception verbs, the case of physiological metaphor, synesthesia, and unidirectionality of mappings, along with other methodological features. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Afrashi, for sharing your experiences on this subject. I am sure that a lot of people found this presentation useful, since metaphor, as you know, is a very popular theory among students and researchers, to the extent that even in this conference, a large number of the submitted abstracts were about metaphor and its surrounding issue. And so I think we can bring it close to this talk, to the second talk. Again, thank you very much for accepting our invitation and for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.